In a bustling corner of Manhattan, where skyscrapers pierced the clouds and the streets teemed with life, Hartman Atelier stood as a beacon of elegance and ambition. Known as the pinnacle of fashion innovation in the Western Hemisphere, the glass-walled tower glistened in the sunlight, exuding modernity and a sense of exclusivity that only the elite could fully appreciate. Inside the building's top floor, Nathaniel Hartman's office commanded attention with its sleek design and panoramic views of the city. The man himself, tall and impeccably dressed in tailored suits that emphasized his broad shoulders and effortless authority, was a figure both revered and enigmatic. His jet-black hair, always perfectly groomed, contrasted sharply with piercing green eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. To those around him, Nathaniel was an unshakable leader, a man whose decisions shaped industries and defined trends. Yet behind the sharp lines of his suits and the impenetrable gaze was a solitude so profound that even his unparalleled success couldn't fill the void. That morning, Nathaniel sat at his pristine glass desk, his focus fixed on reviewing contracts for an upcoming collaboration with a celebrated European designer. His brow furrowed slightly as he considered the implications of the partnership. But before he could make a final note, the heavy oak doors to his office swung open. Serena Kensington entered, her presence commanding and magnetic. Serena was not just Nathaniel's fiancée, she was the epitome of Manhattan glamour. Her tall, statuesque frame was wrapped in a crimson dress that accentuated her flawless silhouette, and her blonde waves cascaded down her back like liquid gold. But beneath the polished exterior lay a woman of sharp ambition whose drive for power was as formidable as her beauty. "Nathaniel," Serena began, her tone sharp enough to slice through the room's quiet, "we need to talk." Nathaniel set his pen down and leaned back slightly, already sensing the confrontation brewing. "What is it, Serena?" he asked, his voice calm but wary. She stepped forward, her blue eyes blazing. "The engagement ring you gave me at the gala, what were you thinking? A modest diamond? Do you have any idea how that reflects on me?" Nathaniel's expression remained neutral, but inside, he braced himself. "I thought the ring was elegant, timeless, something that matched your style." "Timeless?" Serena scoffed, crossing her arms. "Nathaniel, that ring screams mediocrity. I need something that speaks to my position, to who I am. I am not some ordinary woman, and I will not accept an ordinary symbol of our engagement." Nathaniel took a deep breath, maintaining his composure. "Serena, if you don't like the ring, we can address it. There's no need to make this into something bigger than it is." But Serena was not one to be easily placated. "This isn't just about a ring," she snapped. "It's about respect. I deserve something extraordinary, something that shows everyone I am your equal, not an afterthought." As her voice rose, the tension in the room seemed to thicken. Unbeknownst to the couple, the heated exchange was not entirely private. In the adjoining bathroom, Emily Rivera froze mid-motion, her hand still clutching a cloth she had been using to polish the marble countertops. Emily, a young janitor whose diligence and quiet demeanor had made her nearly invisible to the staff at Hartman Atelier, had been scrubbing the office early that morning as part of her routine. She had heard fragments of their argument through the slightly ajar door, but as Serena's voice grew louder, curiosity tethered her to the spot. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the venom in Serena's words made her chest tighten. How could someone so privileged speak to Nathaniel that way? From what little Emily had observed during her time cleaning his office, Nathaniel was kind and thoughtful. A man burdened by responsibilities that few could comprehend. Lost in thought, Emily accidentally knocked over a bottle of cleaning solution, the sound echoing like a firework in the otherwise hushed room. "Who's there?" Serena's voice snapped, sharp as a whip. Emily emerged hesitantly, her cheeks flushed, as she avoided eye contact. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she murmured. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just finishing my work." Serena's gaze raked over Emily like a blade, her lips curling into a sneer. Another incompetent staff member. Do you people even know how to do your jobs without causing problems? Nathaniel stepped in, his tone steady but firm. Serena, that's enough. Emily is just doing her job. There's no need for this. But Serena's fury was not easily quelled. This is exactly the problem, Nathaniel. You tolerate mediocrity, whether it's in your staff or in the ring you gave me. You're supposed to be the best, yet you're surrounded by incompetence. Emily, feeling the heat of Serena's ire, stammered another apology and quickly backed out of the room, her eyes glancing briefly at Nathaniel. To her surprise, his gaze met hers, filled with a mix of frustration and something deeper. Sadness, perhaps. Pushing her cleaning cart down the hallway, Emily's thoughts raced. How could a man like Nathaniel endure someone as cruel as Serena? It wasn't her place to judge, but the exchange lingered in her mind, an ember of compassion flickering in her chest. As she reached the service elevator, an idea began to form. It was small, almost foolish, but it refused to be dismissed. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way to remind Nathaniel of his worth, something simple, something that would cut through the noise of wealth and ambition that seemed to suffocate his world. That night, in her tiny Queen's apartment, Emily set her plan in motion. From the balcony, where she nurtured a modest collection of plants, she plucked a single white rose. Its petals were pristine, untainted by the chaos of the city below. She placed the rose in a clear glass jar, tying it with red and gold ribbons salvaged from a craft project. On a small piece of parchment, she wrote a note in her neat, looping handwriting. Even in the darkest storms, the sun remains. Don't let the shadows of others dim your light. You are more than enough. The next morning, Emily arrived early at Hartman Atelier. She knew better than to deliver the rose directly, fearing discovery. Instead, she left it with the internal courier service, ensuring the package would arrive at Nathaniel's desk anonymously. When Nathaniel entered his office that day, he noticed the package immediately. The faint scent of lavender drifted through the air, and as he opened the jar, his brow furrowed in curiosity. The rose, so simple yet elegant, caught the light, and as he unfolded the note, a strange warmth settled over him. The words resonated deeply, like a whisper to his soul. For a moment, the noise of the world outside fell away, and he allowed himself a rare smile. Over the following days, the roses continued to appear, each one a different color, each accompanied by a new message. Nathaniel found himself looking forward to the arrival of each rose with an anticipation that surprised him. Every morning, a carefully arranged package would appear on his desk, a yellow rose to inspire hope, a pink rose symbolizing tenderness, and even a fiery coral rose that seemed to reignite some long-forgotten spark within him. Each flower came with a note, handwritten and deeply personal, as if the sender had looked into his very soul. True strength is found in walking your own path, even when it feels lonely. The rarest treasures are not those on display, but those carried in the heart. Greatness is not in shining the brightest, but in illuminating others without expectation. Nathaniel pondered over the messages late at night, seated by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The roses and their accompanying words felt unlike anything he had experienced. They weren't about status or expectation. They were quiet acts of kindness, reminders of a world beyond the relentless pace of his career. Though intrigued, Nathaniel remained uncertain about the identity of his mysterious admirer. He theorized it could be one of the models, designers, or executives frequenting Hartman Atelier, perhaps someone enamored by his power and prestige. Yet the notes carried a sincerity that made him doubt these assumptions. Whoever was behind the gestures, they seemed to understand him in a way that no one else did. Meanwhile, Emily continued her routine as if nothing had changed, carefully orchestrating each delivery to ensure her anonymity. She selected the roses meticulously from her modest collection, trimming the stems and wrapping them with small details that reflected her creativity. A ribbon here, a sprig of ivy there. Her notes, written in quiet moments late at night, carried pieces of her heart, words she wished she could say aloud. For Emily, these gestures were an expression of the admiration she felt for Nathaniel. It wasn't the kind of infatuation born of fantasies. Rather, it was rooted in the glimpses of humanity she saw in him. She recognized his exhaustion, his unspoken yearning for something deeper, and she needed, to remind him of his worth. Each morning, as she worked quietly in his office, Emily observed Nathaniel's subtle transformation. The faint smile that would cross his lips when he noticed the newest rose, the moments he spent reading and rereading the notes, these signs brought her a bittersweet joy. She was making a difference, even if he never knew it was her. But as days turned into weeks, Emily's peaceful routine was disrupted. In the lavish world of Hartman Atelier, rumors spread as quickly as champagne at a gala. It wasn't long before whispers of the roses reached the ears of the staff, sparking curiosity and speculation. "Have you heard about the roses Mr. Hartman's been getting?" one assistant murmured to another. "Of course," the other replied, leaning in conspiratorially. "It must be someone trying to get his attention. I mean, who wouldn't want a shot with him?" These whispers eventually reached Serena Kensington. Though her relationship with Nathaniel had grown strained, Serena still considered herself an integral part of his world, and she wasn't about to let an anonymous admirer threaten her position. She confronted Nathaniel one evening as they dined in a private booth at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. "Nathaniel," she began, her tone laced with suspicion, "I've noticed you've been distracted lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" Nathaniel set down his glass of wine, studying her carefully. "I'm not sure what you mean, Serena." She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the table. "I mean the roses, the ones everyone in the office is talking about. Who's sending them to you?" Nathaniel hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I don't know," he admitted truthfully. "They've been arriving anonymously." Serena's eyes narrowed. "And you're just accepting them? No questions asked?" He sighed, his patience thinning. "They're harmless, Serena. Whoever's sending them isn't looking for attention. The notes are thoughtful, even kind." "Kind?" she repeated incredulously. "Nathaniel, you're a public figure. You can't afford to be naive. For all you know, this person could be trying to manipulate you." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Not everyone operates with ulterior motives, Serena." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she dropped the subject, at least for the moment. While Serena plotted ways to uncover the sender, another figure emerged with her own agenda. Vanessa Lowell, one of Hartman Atelier's most celebrated models, had also heard the rumors about the roses. With her statuesque beauty, piercing hazel eyes, and a shrewd mind, Vanessa was a woman accustomed to getting what she wanted. She saw the mystery as an opportunity to win Nathaniel's favor, a step that could elevate her career and secure her place among the fashion elite. One evening, Vanessa timed her exit from the atelier perfectly, slipping into the elevator just as Nathaniel stepped inside. "Mr. Hartman," she greeted, her voice silky smooth. "Vanessa," he replied with a polite nod. She hesitated for a moment, as though summoning her courage. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," she began, her tone carefully measured. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Vanessa glanced away, feigning shyness. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but the roses you've been receiving, I sent them." Nathaniel's expression shifted to one of surprise. "You did?" She nodded, her gaze calculatedly vulnerable. "I didn't mean to create a mystery. I just admire you so much, and I didn't know how else to express it. The notes, they came from the heart." Nathaniel studied her carefully. Vanessa was poised, elegant, and undeniably charismatic. Her confession seemed plausible, and yet something about it didn't quite sit right. "I see," he said finally. Well, thank you for your honesty, Vanessa, she smiled, sensing she had made progress. It was my pleasure, Mr. Hartman. I hope the roses brought you some happiness. As the elevator doors opened and Vanessa stepped out, Nathaniel remained behind, a flicker of doubt lingering in his mind. Emily, however, had overheard Vanessa's claim and felt a pang of devastation. Though she had always known her gestures were anonymous, the idea of someone else taking credit for them stung more deeply than she expected. For the first time since she had begun sending the roses, Emily considered stopping. After all, what was the point if Nathaniel believed someone else was behind them? That night, as she sat in her tiny apartment, Emily wrote what she decided would be her final note. She paired it with a crimson rose, its deep red petals rich with meaning. Sometimes the greatest love is the one that steps back, allowing happiness to bloom. Be well. The next morning she placed the rose in its jar and sent it off, her heart heavy with resignation. Nathaniel found the crimson rose waiting on his desk when he arrived that morning. Its bold color stood out starkly against the minimalist decor of his office, and the note tucked inside carried an air of finality that unsettled him. Sometimes the greatest love is the one that steps back, allowing happiness to bloom. Be well. He read the words several times, their meaning sinking deeper with each pass. The roses, which had become a cherished part of his mornings, now felt like a puzzle missing its final piece. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. For weeks, the roses had brought clarity to his chaotic life. They reminded him that there was more to his existence than the relentless pursuit of perfection. But now, as they seemingly came to an end, he felt a void open within him, a reminder of how much he longed for connection and authenticity. The timing felt strangely deliberate. Vanessa's confession was still fresh in his mind, and though it had seemed plausible on the surface, the more he reflected, the less it resonated. The notes were personal, deeply introspective. Could someone like Vanessa, whose ambition was so plainly worn on her sleeve, have written such words? Nathaniel was not a man to leave questions unanswered. He decided to investigate. In the bustling hive of Hartman Atelier, whispers about Nathaniel and the roses had only grown louder. Vanessa basked in the subtle attention she received from her colleagues, carefully crafting a narrative that aligned with her supposed role as the mysterious admirer. But her confidence began to waver when she noticed Nathaniel observing her more closely during meetings and casual interactions. His questions became more pointed, his expressions harder to read. "Vanessa," he asked one afternoon, "what inspired you to write the notes that came with the roses?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, well," she began, searching for words that would sound convincing. "I've always admired your work ethic and your vision. I suppose I just wanted to encourage you." Nathaniel's lips quirked into a faint smile, but his eyes betrayed his skepticism. "Encouragement," he echoed. "It's interesting." The notes were quite profound, more personal than professional, almost as if the writer knew me. Vanessa's confidence faltered further. I think everyone admires you, Mr. Hartman. I just put it into words." Nathaniel nodded, but offered no further response. Vanessa excused herself shortly after, retreating to the safety of the atelier's upper floors, where she could collect her thoughts. Meanwhile, Emily went about her day in quiet resignation. Though she no longer sent the roses, she found herself lingering in Nathaniel's office more than usual, tidying areas that didn't need cleaning and making small adjustments to his space. She told herself it was habit, but deep down she knew she simply wanted to remain connected to him in some way. One afternoon, as she polished the edge of his glass desk, Nathaniel walked in unexpectedly. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle but firm. She straightened immediately, clutching the cloth in her hands. "Yes, Mr. Hartman?" "I've been meaning to ask you something," he continued, stepping closer. "You're here early most mornings, aren't you?" Emily nodded, her heart pounding. Yes, sir. I like to make sure everything is spotless before anyone arrives. Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, studying her. And during those mornings, have you noticed anyone leaving packages on my desk? Her breath caught. Packages, she repeated, feigning ignorance. No, sir. I haven't seen anything like that. Nathaniel's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and Emily felt as though he could see through her carefully crafted composure. But then he nodded, almost to himself, and stepped away. Thank you, Emily, he said simply. As he turned to leave, Emily's knees nearly buckled. She had managed to keep her secret, for now. That evening, Nathaniel sat in his penthouse, staring at the collection of roses he had preserved. Each bloom had been placed in a glass display case, arranged in the order they had been received. The sight of them filled him with an ache he couldn't quite define. He picked up the note that had accompanied the crimson rose, the final message, and read it again. Sometimes the greatest love is the one that steps back, allowing happiness to bloom. Be well. The words haunted him. They spoke of selflessness, of a love so pure it expected nothing in return. And yet, they also spoke of a goodbye, and that was something Nathaniel couldn't accept. His mind returned to Emily, the way she spoke, the quiet strength in her presence. There was something about her that felt familiar, as though she carried the same warmth that had radiated through the notes. He decided he needed to know the truth. The following morning, Nathaniel arrived at Heartwarming Atelier with a determined focus. The question of the roses had consumed his thoughts, and he knew he couldn't move forward until he had an answer. Emily was in his office early, as always, methodically wiping the already spotless glass surfaces. She moved with quiet efficiency, but her hands trembled slightly as she worked, her thoughts still tangled in the aftermath of their last conversation. "Emily?" Nathaniel said as he entered, his voice calm but resolute. She froze for a moment before turning to face him. "Good morning, Mr. Hartman. I was just finishing here. I'll be out of your way shortly." "There is no need to rush," he replied, his tone unexpectedly soft. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk." Emily's heart sank. She had a sinking feeling about what he might say. "Of course," she murmured, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Nathaniel gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Please, have a seat." Emily hesitated before reluctantly lowering herself into the chair. She placed her hands in her lap, fidgeting nervously, as Nathaniel sat across from her. "You've been with Heartwarming Atelier for how long now?" he asked, leaning back slightly. "Almost 2 years," she answered, her voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside her. "You've always been dedicated," he observed. "I've noticed how much care you put into your work." "Thank you, sir," she replied, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Nathaniel studied her for a moment before continuing. "Emily, there's something I need to ask you, and I want you to be honest with me." Her heart began to race, and she swallowed hard. "Of course." "The roses," he said, his green eyes locked on hers. "Were they from you?" The room seemed to shrink around her. For a moment she couldn't speak, her mind racing with 1,000 possible responses. But the sincerity in Nathaniel's gaze left no room for lies. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nathaniel exhaled, his expression softening. "I thought so," he said quietly. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. You did?" "I wasn't certain at first," he admitted. "But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The words in those notes, they felt too genuine, too thoughtful to come from anyone who didn't truly care." Emily lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushing. "I didn't mean for you to find out," she said. "I just wanted to remind you of your worth, that you're more than the image everyone expects you to be." Nathaniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "Emily, do you know what those roses meant to me?" She shook her head, unable to find the courage to look at him. "They gave me something I hadn't felt in years, hope," he said. "They reminded me that there's more to life than ambition and appearances, that there's still beauty in simplicity, in honesty." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she finally met his gaze. "I never expected anything in return," she said. "I just wanted to give you something real." Nathaniel's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "And you did," he said. "More than you'll ever know." For a moment the room was silent, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. "Emily," Nathaniel said softly, "would you join me for coffee later today? I'd like to continue this conversation." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Coffee?" "Yes," he replied, his smile growing. "Just coffee. No grand expectations, just a chance to talk." Emily hesitated, her heart pounding. Finally, she nodded. "I'd like that." That afternoon, Emily stood by the service entrance, nervously smoothing the fabric of her modest dress. She had changed out of her work uniform, her hands trembling as she adjusted her scarf. The invitation had been so unexpected, so surreal, that she had spent the last hour questioning whether she had misunderstood Nathaniel's intentions. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Turning, she found Nathaniel approaching, dressed impeccably yet understatedly in a tailored navy jacket and an open-collared shirt. He smiled, and for the first time Emily saw warmth in his expression, something more genuine than the composed professionalism she was accustomed to. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as they began walking toward the cafe down the street. Emily glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "I should be the one thanking you," she replied. "This isn't exactly something I imagined would ever happen." Nathaniel chuckled softly. "If I'm being honest, neither did I. But after everything, I think we owe each other a conversation." The cafe was a cozy, quiet spot, nestled between two brownstones, a far cry from the high-end venues Nathaniel typically frequented. He held the door open for her, and they settled into a small corner table by the window. Emily fidgeted with her cup, her nerves evident. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady but kind. "Emily," he began, "I'd like to know, what made you start sending the roses?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I suppose it's because I saw something in you that reminded me of myself," she admitted. "You seemed lost, in a way, surrounded by so much, yet isolated. I wanted to remind you that there's more to life than what people expect of you." Nathaniel nodded slowly, her words resonating deeply. "And you did," he said. "You reminded me of things I'd forgotten, that there's value in authenticity, that kindness doesn't have to come with conditions." Emily smiled shyly, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "I wasn't sure if it made a difference. Most days, I thought you'd never even notice." "I noticed," Nathaniel said firmly, "from the very first rose. It was unexpected, but it stayed with me. And when the roses stopped," Emily looked down, "I thought it was for the best. When Vanessa—" She paused, struggling to say the name. "When she claimed the roses, I didn't want to complicate things," Nathaniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I should have seen through her sooner. She was convincing, but it never felt real. Not the way your words did." Emily blinked, her throat tightening. "You mean that?" "I do," Nathaniel said. "And now I want to do something I haven't done in years. I want to be honest with you and with myself." Emily's heart raced, the intensity of his words filling the small space between them. Meanwhile, back at Hartman Atelier, whispers about Nathaniel's absence began to circulate. Vanessa, ever perceptive, sensed a shift in the dynamic she had carefully tried to manipulate. Her confidence faltered as she noticed Nathaniel's growing distance, and Serena's smug looks only deepened her unease. "You seem tense," Serena remarked slyly, crossing her arms as she leaned against a wall near the atelier's main hall. Vanessa shot her a sharp look. "And you seem far too interested in my business," Serena smirked. "Oh, darling, your business became everyone's business the moment you started spinning those little stories about the roses. You didn't think no one would notice, did you?" Vanessa stiffened, but before she could respond, Serena leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Word of advice? quit while you're ahead before Nathaniel decides to expose you for the fraud you are." With that, Serena walked away, leaving Vanessa seething. As Nathaniel and Emily continued their conversation, the tension that had initially hung between them began to dissipate. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt like he could speak freely, unburdened by the expectations that typically surrounded him. Emily, too, found herself relaxing. She shared stories of her modest upbringing, her love for tending plants on her tiny balcony, and her quiet dreams of creating beauty in the simplest ways. Nathaniel listened intently, drawn to her sincerity and the warmth that radiated from her words. When the conversation began to wind down, Nathaniel leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Emily, I want to thank you," he said, "not just for the roses, but for reminding me of something I'd forgotten, how it feels to truly connect with someone." Emily's cheeks flushed, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "I only gave what I could." "And that's exactly why it means so much," Nathaniel replied. As they left the cafe and walked back to Hartman Atelier, the city buzzed around them, but it felt as though they were in their own world. Nathaniel stopped just before they reached the building's entrance, turning to Emily. "This doesn't have to be the end," he said. "I'd like to get to know you better if you'll let me." Emily's breath hitched, her chest tightening with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "I'd like that too," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel smiled, a genuine warmth lighting up his face. "Then let's take it one step at a time." For the first time in a long while, both of them felt as though they were standing on the edge of something extraordinary. The days following their coffee outing were a whirlwind of subtle changes at Hartman Atelier. To everyone else, Nathaniel Hartman remained the composed and commanding figure who ran the empire of fashion with precision. But for Emily, something had shifted. Nathaniel began to seek her out in quiet, unobtrusive ways. Their conversations grew longer, spanning topics both trivial and profound. Emily found herself opening up about her love for literature, the stories she read as a means of escape, and her deep appreciation for the beauty in small, everyday things. Nathaniel, in turn, shared pieces of himself that no one else had ever seen. He spoke of his late mother, whose quiet strength had inspired him, and of the pressure he felt to live up to the expectations his family had set long before he was born. "I think that's why your notes affected me so much," he admitted one evening, standing by the window in his office, as Emily quietly tidied a nearby shelf. "They reminded me of her, the way she believed in simplicity, in the importance of seeing people for who they are, not what they have." Emily paused, her hand hovering over a book she had been placing back on the shelf. "She must have been remarkable," she said softly. "She was," Nathaniel said, a rare smile gracing his features. "You would have liked her." Their bond deepened with every passing interaction, but their connection did not go unnoticed. Vanessa was growing increasingly restless. Though she had claimed credit for the roses, she could feel her influence slipping away. Nathaniel no longer sought her company, and the casual flirtations she had once used to captivate him now seemed to fall flat. Her suspicions about Emily began to take shape one afternoon when she caught sight of the young woman leaving Nathaniel's office. Emily's posture was unassuming, her head bowed, as if she were trying to make herself invisible, but Vanessa noticed the faint flush in her cheeks and the way Nathaniel's gaze lingered on her as she walked away. Vanessa's lips curled into a smirk. "So that's how it is," she murmured to herself. Determined to regain control, Vanessa began plotting her next move. That evening, Nathaniel found himself alone in his penthouse, the city lights sprawling endlessly beyond the windows. He stared at the roses still displayed on his mantelpiece, each bloom a reminder of the transformation he had undergone. The final note, the one that had accompanied the crimson rose, rested in his hand. He read it again, the words echoing in his mind. "Sometimes the greatest love is the one that steps back, allowing happiness to bloom. Be well. The sentiment struck him differently now. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a selfless offering, a declaration of love that asked for nothing in return. And yet the person who had written those words was now a part of his life, no longer a distant mystery, but a real and tangible presence. He knew he couldn't let this slip away. The following week, Hartman Atelier hosted its annual gala, a lavish event that brought together designers, models, and celebrities from around the world. The grand ballroom of the hotel was transformed into a spectacle of elegance, with crystal chandeliers casting shimmering light over the polished floors. Nathaniel arrived late, his presence immediately commanding attention. He wore a tailored black suit with a subtle shimmer that caught the light, his green eyes scanning the room. At his side was Vanessa, who had managed to maneuver herself into his company for the evening. She clung to his arm with practiced ease, her every gesture designed to convey a sense of intimacy. But Nathaniel's mind was elsewhere, his thoughts drifting to Emily and the quiet moments they had shared. Emily, meanwhile, was stationed behind the scenes, helping to manage last-minute preparations for the event. Though she had no official role in the gala, her natural eye for detail and her calm demeanor made her an invaluable presence. As the night progressed, Nathaniel found his gaze wandering, searching the edges of the room. He excused himself from Vanessa's company and made his way toward the back of the ballroom. There, in the shadows, he saw her. Emily was arranging a small floral display, her hands moving deftly as she adjusted the delicate blooms. She wore a simple but elegant dress, the soft fabric brushing against her frame, and her hair was swept into a loose braid that framed her face. Nathaniel's breath caught. She looked radiant, entirely unaware of how effortlessly she outshone the room's carefully curated opulence. "Emily," he called softly, stepping closer. She turned, startled, and her eyes widened when she saw him. "Mr. Hartman," she said, her voice hesitant. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "but I'm glad I did." Emily looked down, her fingers brushing against the petals of a rose. "I was just finishing up here. I'll leave you to your guests." Nathaniel reached out, his hand lightly touching her arm. "Stay," he said. Emily froze, her heart pounding as she met his gaze. "There's something I need to say," Nathaniel continued, "something I've been thinking about for a long time." Her breath hitched. "What is it?" Before he could respond, a burst of applause filled the room as the evening's host took the stage to deliver a speech. Nathaniel sighed, glancing toward the crowd. "Come with me," he said, his voice low. Emily hesitated, but nodded, allowing him to lead her away from the bustling ballroom. Nathaniel's frustration deepened as the hours ticked by without a sign of Emily. He asked around discreetly, hoping to avoid fueling the already rampant gossip. Most responses were vague or dismissive, but finally, one of the office assistants offered a clue. "I think she mentioned taking a personal day," the assistant said hesitantly. "She seemed upset." Nathaniel's chest tightened. He left the office immediately, a sense of urgency propelling him through the bustling streets of Manhattan. Emily sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, staring at the neatly folded roses pressed between pages of an old book. She had kept the flowers Nathaniel had given back to her during their conversations, unable to part with them despite her attempts to move on. Her phone buzzed with a message from her supervisor at Hartman Atelier, asking if she planned to return the next day. She didn't respond. A knock at her door startled her. Frowning, she set the book aside and stood, hesitating before opening the door just a crack. Her breath caught when she saw who stood on the other side. "Nathaniel," she whispered. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "May I come in?" Emily stepped back, opening the door wider. "How did you—" "I asked around," he admitted as he entered, his tall frame seeming almost out of place in her modest apartment. He glanced around, taking in the cozy but humble space. "I needed to see you." Emily crossed her arms, her nerves fraying under his intense gaze. Why? Nathaniel turned to face her fully, his green eyes locking onto hers. Because I couldn't let this end here, not after everything we've shared. Emily looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't owe me anything, Nathaniel. Whatever this is, it's better if we stop before it gets more complicated. No, he said firmly, stepping closer. I won't accept that. Emily, you've been the one person who's shown me what it means to be seen, not as a CEO, not as a symbol of success, but as a human being. Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears. And you think that's enough? You think it's that simple? Nathaniel hesitated, searching for the right words. No, I don't think it's simple. I know what I'm asking for isn't fair, not to you, and not to the life you've built for yourself. But I also know that for the first time in years, I feel like I'm alive. And that's because of you. Emily's resolve began to crumble. Nathaniel, I don't care about what the world thinks, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. I don't care about the whispers or the expectations. What I care about is you. And if you'll let me, I want to build something real with you, something honest. Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks as she looked up at him. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice trembling. Nathaniel reached for her hands, holding them gently but firmly. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take the first step with me. Emily stared at him for a long moment, her heart warring with her fears. Finally, she nodded, a small, hesitant smile breaking through her tears. I'll try, she whispered. Relief and joy flooded Nathaniel's expression. Without thinking, he pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her as if she might disappear. Over the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed in quiet, meaningful ways. Nathaniel began carving out time from his demanding schedule to share small moments with Emily, walking through Central Park, helping her tend to her plants, or simply sitting together in the stillness of her apartment. At Heartwarming Atelier, their connection remained discreet, though it didn't escape the notice of everyone. Serena, seeing the genuine bond between them, eventually stepped aside, her ambition redirected toward other ventures. Vanessa, exposed as a fraud when Nathaniel publicly dismissed her advances, quietly left the company, her influence fading as quickly as it had risen. For Emily and Nathaniel, the challenges were far from over. Their worlds were vastly different, and they often struggled to reconcile their pasts with the future they wanted to build together. But they faced each obstacle with honesty and patience, drawing strength from the connection that had started with a single rose. On a crisp autumn evening, months after that fateful gala, Nathaniel invited Emily to his penthouse for dinner. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city in hues of gold and amber, he led her to the terrace where a small table was set with candles and flowers. Nathaniel, Emily said, her voice tinged with curiosity, what's all this? He took her hands in his expression serious but tender. This is me thanking you, he said, for showing me what love can be. Before she could respond, he lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Emily Rivera, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You've taught me how to be the best version of myself. You've given me something I never thought I'd find, peace. Will you marry me? Emily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, as tears welled in her eyes. Nathaniel, she whispered, her voice breaking. He looked up at her, his heart in his gaze. I know this world isn't always kind, and I know we'll have to fight for this, but I'm ready to fight for you, for us, if you'll have me. Emily nodded, a radiant smile breaking through her tears. Yes, she said, her voice trembling with joy. Yes, I'll marry you. Nathaniel rose, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. They stood together under the glow of the city lights, their hearts full of hope for the life they would build together. A life rooted not in ambition or expectation, but in the simple, powerful truth of love. As they embraced, the faint scent of roses lingered in the air, a reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey that had only just begun.